The banged up Maple Leafs look to pick up another win, but can we also see some roster movement? We'll discuss some potential trade ideas here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome here to the Locked On Leafs podcast hosted by myself, David Morassutti, and joining me today is my guest co-host, Frank Stanisci, joining us for a second straight episode and call from the bullpen as Mike is not here this week. So, Frank, first off, thank you for coming back.
You're welcome. He's cruising.
He's cruising.
And being on, and I'm winning. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate being here.
I want to thank also everybody for making the Locked On Leafs podcast your first listen of the day, and for making the Locked On Network the number one sports podcast network in North America. And today, the Toronto Maple Leafs are still injured, still dealing with players that are, in and out of the lineup here. Kind of still waiting for, potential line rushes. So maybe we get to those as the show goes along. But a couple of updates for the players that we know for a fact won't be playing tonight against the Columbus Blue Jackets. Auston Matthews had already been ruled out. Nicolas Roy had already been ruled out. Obviously, Chris Tanev, Brandon Carlo, and Anthony Stolarz. But we still don't know about two players. Matthew Knies and Scott Laughton are kind of two players that we're kind of waiting to see whether or not they'll be there, and we'll hopefully have a bit of an update in the second part of the show. As we're recording this, they're all skating. We're getting ready for the morning skate. Nicolas Roy was out skating the first time he's been skating, but we already know he's ruled out. And the same with Auston Matthews. Third straight day he's been on the ice. And Frank, I don't think it gets talked about a lot with these injuries, but I don't know, does it truly get talked about how, a team that's trying to get a flow and try to get some momentum, when you have all these injuries kind of in and out of the lineup, just the way it disrupts chemistry?
Yeah, and you know what, David, that word the GM used comes in handy again. It gets in the way of this team connecting. It creates not a disconnect because they haven't been connected yet. This is a team that has not had its full lineup since the beginning of the season. And it doesn't get a chance to basically be where they're supposed to be. And that's not lost among the players because, quite frankly, when you don't have guys that are key, like tonight, their number one left winger, Knies, is not available, not playing. Anyway, the point is he's not available. Laughton is a guy that's central to the penalty killing, which has not done well without him. So how do you build a team when you have pieces missing? This is the challenge that you're alluding to.
No, it is a big challenge. We're trying to, this Leafs team is trying to get itself, on a bit of a roll in terms of, win a few games in a row so that you can get yourself out of this kind of rut that you've been in since the start of the year. And, I'm just going to quickly pull up the, what we had seen on Tuesday in terms of the line rushes, because more likely than not, this is what we're going to see again potentially, right? If this all depends a lot on Scott Laughton, if Scott Laughton will be available, and if Knies is available, that changes things a little bit. But Robertson, Tavares, Nylander, McMahon, Domi, Cowan, Michelli, Quillen, Blais, Joshua, Lawrence, and Yarncroc.
Are we sure about Blais in or out?
He's okay. He's been given the clear after. Yeah, that was the other update. Thank you for reminding me. That was the other update, that him being taken out of the game on Tuesday when he was coughing up some blood following a hit. That was just a precautionary. Everything came back good. Obviously, you get worried about potential internal bleeding and things like that. So he's good. But it's funny because a lot of people are like, oh, you shouldn't be, so hot and headed about the Leafs being the St. Louis Blues. This version beat the St. Louis Blues. Like, okay, it's one thing if you have Matthews, Knies, Lawton, and a bunch of those guys and Watton. But we're talking about like 4 pretty crucial players out of like decent players out of the lineup. That's why you say, okay, you give them their flowers for, being able to find a way to win with this lineup. Like, let's be honest here.
Absolutely. That's totally true. And they've been 0-1 5 games in a row. I'm sorry to drag in a football term, but you want to be, it's not, and the GM made it very clear. It's not about looking at the standings. It's about looking where the team sits, and where the team sits is the process is not working. And until the process starts to work, you got to keep trying to figure out how to make it work. Well, victories tend to give confirmation that, okay, where we sit today isn't so bad. What can we do not to rest, but to build on? And that's the whole point. The Leafs haven't had a chance, to build on any success. And let's face it, teams develop based on how they deal with losses. And if they don't deal with losses in a way that becomes successful, they change from losses to wins, then you have a concern. And then you're just, the blender goes to work. And so you don't have a consistent process. And so connection and process, 2 words that the GM used, are the reason why it's important that they won that game against St. Louis. It doesn't matter who they're playing. It's about the W. It's about the dub.
Yeah, no, it is. That's what it is. At some point, you take what you have to look at wins. And look, Brad Treliving said in his press conference, yes, we've won games, but all we've just done is score more goals than our opponent, which, I mean, Brad, that is the kind of the point of a win. But he's essentially saying that we haven't played to our style, to our identity, right? But it's also hard to play to your identity when you're missing a lot of players. But at the same time, it also shows that the players coming in understand the assignment, right? That's a part of it as well.
And execute.
Right? So there's a little bit of that part of it too. I look at, these injuries too. And people are talking about, making deals, and we'll talk about that a little later. A little hard to do too when you have all these injuries, because you can't just go and trade. And people talking about selling and all this stuff. I mean, that would never happen now. The only
they
time
don't even know what they have yet. They don't even know what they have. How do you trade when you don't know what you got?
Yeah, but we'll talk a little bit about that when we start seeing the health, the team start to get back on the road to health. There's going to be some of these players that are stepping up right now. I think would love to see more opportunity, but at the same time, there is going to be a bit of there might be some shakeups down the road here in Toronto. We'll discuss that, but before we do, the Columbus Blue Jackets are in town. I'm sure the Leafs will like a better result than the last time they played them, so we'll kind of look at how the Blue Jackets have been doing lately, what the Leafs need to do this time around to get on a better end of the win column in this regard. We'll do that next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Rugiet. Let's be real, making excuses doesn't solve anything. We've all heard them before. It's just stress, I'm tired, or it happens to everyone sometimes. When it comes to performance, sometimes your body just needs a little extra support, and that's where Rugiet comes in. Rugiet.com offers fast-acting, doctor-prescribed treatments for ED designed to help you stop making excuses and start making moves. Rugiet makes it easy to get started. You just get connected with a board-certified doctor, 100% online, no awkward waiting rooms or no in-person appointments. If prescribed, your treatment ships discreetly straight to your door. The process is fast, simple, and private, and it's all handled by real doctors. It's about confidence, connection, and getting back to the moments that matter. Visit Rugiet.com/LockedOnNHL to get 15% off your order. That's Rugiet.com/LockedOnNHL. And don't forget to use our code LockedOnNHL to know that we sent you. Rugiet, stop making excuses and start making moves. The Locked On Leafs podcast continues here. David Morassutti, and join me out of the bullpen, off the bench, from the minors, whatever you want term you want to use, is my friend Frank Stanisci. Mike is expected to be back next week. I mean, we only have one more episode between now and next week, so he'll be back next week. Always want to thank you guys for making the Locked On Leafs podcast your first listen, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So, Frank, we have the Columbus Blue Jackets on tap for the Leafs tonight. Those of you may forget that when the Leafs played the Blue Jackets earlier this year, didn't necessarily go so well.
It started them on this roll that they're on right now. They started with them not playing well, and it continued. And this is a 4-point. This is a 4-point game, right? Columbus is at 22 points. Toronto's at 20. So this is Toronto working up the standings to get to the wild card. And one of the teams they got to pass is the Blue Jackets. So this game has potential for being very important.
Yeah. So the last time, obviously, they played was back at the end of October. The Leafs lost that game 6-3. Many would remember that was the game that John Tavares had 500, scored his 500th career goal, kind of took away from the milestone that was, because the Leafs absolutely looked terrible in this game. Now, I'll also say that the goaltending wasn't exactly good in that game. The blue line was not good in that game at all. So I think, obviously, this is a matchup more so in Columbus than in Toronto, where the Leafs have struggled to really get with the Blue Jackets here. And yeah, like you were talking about it, Frank, like the Leafs had won the night before. It was the second half of a back-to-back. They beat the Flames, and you think, okay, let's see if they can start putting together some wins. Well, that didn't happen. No. And they lost in a pretty bad way, in that game. And I think this time around, you're kind of hoping that the Leafs will be more prepared for this Blue Jackets team, which this Blue Jackets team has not exactly played well recently. November, I think they're 2-7 right now. So they got off to a half decent start, Columbus, and they've kind of seen a bit of a downturn here. It's still the pretty similar lineup to, like, there's no real injuries that they're dealing with. Like, I think Boone Jeter has been on the injury, has had an upper body injury, but I'm pretty sure he didn't play against Toronto. So, not much has changed, except Columbus has just really struggled.
And they got to keep the Leafs got to keep them struggling. And we saw them beat St. Louis, a team that struggles. Once they accept the reality that they're one of these teams and they need to pass them, like I said, I'm sorry I'm overemphasizing the importance of this game in the standings, but they are behind Columbus, and they're one of the teams they have to pass. St. Louis, they beat. That's great. They won a hockey game. Now what they need to do is establish that they can go further in winning, like winning 2 games in a row now. They got to go 1-0 again, and they've got to build this idea that they can win and build their confidence. And it really doesn't matter, David. You're 100% right. It doesn't matter who's in the lineup. They have to play well. And this team can play well. And the players they brought in, and I got to say, we talked about Stecher's first game a little bit. I'd like to overemphasize the importance of a puck-carrying defenseman. Regardless of his size, he tends to try to be physical. He plays like he's a lot heavier and a lot bigger. And that's one of the things that's been lacking at the back end of the Maple Leafs. He can help contribute to changing that. And that's important. That's been one of their biggest weaknesses.
Yeah, it has been one of their biggest weaknesses. Is they haven't been able, like, again, this is where things can really change for this group. You can go on a 2-3 game winning streak, and that kind of changes kind of the mood maybe a little bit more here. I think you look at what has ailed this Leafs team is just consistency, effort, right? Against St. Louis, the first 2 periods, I thought they were, it wasn't the most exciting game and things like that, but they controlled play a little bit better. Then St. Louis got that power play goal, and it kind of changed the momentum a bit here. And so they gotta really be careful about the the swings of momentum that this game could bring.
You bring the biggest and most important point that we shouldn't overlook. The boring part of the game is the game that they want to play that's different than previous versions of the Maple Leafs in recent memory. They've got to play boring hockey. That's what their coach wants to do. He wants his team to put the other team to sleep when they're on offense and surprise them, right, when they're put on in a defensive posture. So, like we saw in that last game, we saw what Tavares did. The Leafs need to do more of that. They need to win puck control against the boards, and they need to get the puck out to their big guys that can shoot the puck. We saw a perfect example of how the Leafs need to win today. They're not a rush team any longer. They're a dig, free the puck out, and take advantage of the opportunities that come up because you're surprising the opposition on defense.
Yeah, no, exactly. The details on defense need to come through for them to get better opportunities on offense. Like it's not rocket science in a lot of ways. It's what Craig Berube asked for. You play good, solid defense, and then you'll see the turnaround on offense, right? You'll get those offensive opportunities, but you need to take care of your own end first. And we saw, some improvements with a guy like Troy Stecher being in the lineup did help. But one player I've talked about him before on this podcast, and some people have been kind of bringing him up online a little bit here. Simon Benoit.
He hasn't looked like the guy.
He has not looked. I mean, look, he wasn't. Here's the thing. Last year, he was okay. He was fine, but he wasn't. I think some people maybe miscast him a little bit. Yes, he had that overtime winner in the playoffs. You can kind of take that. You can take a little bit of the solace and with things like that. But here's the thing. Simon Benoit is supposed to be that physical style, bring that physical style, tough defense. Everybody remembers the Superman punch.
Oh, geez, that was
right. We haven't seen that. I have not seen that Simon Benoit. I haven't seen the spark, the fire from him this year. And we know that. I know that he had an injury earlier in the year, and maybe he's just trying to get over whatever that was. But him as a top 4 guy, we know that's not his place. That's not what he's supposed to be. And when a guy like Carlo comes back, he shifts down to the third pairing. But he's a player I look at right now where he needs to see his game improve, because we're also seeing it impact Jake McCabe a little bit here, who has not also played up to snuff with Chris Tanev.
Yeah, you're pointing out probably one of the biggest issues that the Leafs have to deal with, and that is I mentioned about boring hockey and physical. The effort that Benoit showed in the playoffs is missing right now. His willingness to skate a little faster down the ice, his willingness to bring the puck in the zone when he can, like skate down the ice and be an offensive threat. We saw that in the playoffs. We haven't seen that this year. Now, to your point, I agree 100%. He's a top 6 defenseman, but he's a top 6 defenseman who can play like a top 4 defenseman during a game. Not ask him to do it the whole game, but he can do it once in a while. Every game, there should be him moving forward, surprising, the scouts of the other team, watching how the Leafs play, because they scout each other. He lacks the ability to surprise the opposition, which he had in the playoffs, because he surprised me with what he was capable of doing. And I'm sure other people who are watching.
Yeah, against St. Louis, he was actually the worst defensive defenseman by the stat sheet. So, he's a player there I think you need to see a little bit better of. Like Philip Myers, you can scratch a Philip Myers. He's not asked to play that role, a big role, and you can replace him with somebody else. But you can't scratch a Simon Benoit because you really don't have anyone that can step up and play the minutes that he's playing right now and the role that he's playing right now. And I don't know if we're at that point yet, but when these guys get back and healthy, right? When you add Tanev, when you add Carlo, and now that you got Stecher here, right?
Yep.
You're not taking out Riley, you're not taking out OEL, and you're not taking out Jake McCabe. So guess what? Simon Benoit, to me, like he's going to have to start picking up his play over the next few games. So if he's going to want to have a consistent role in this lineup.
There's the other impact that having those players in the lineup that affects players like Benoit. Right now, maybe this is just an assumption on my part because I can't get in his head, but it looks like he's managing his minutes. And when a player manages their minutes, they're not giving the kind of effort they can. So if he has less time on the ice, his TOI shrinks. I think he becomes more proactive, is the way I'll describe it. Right now, he's reactive, and that's not a good thing all the time. So if he could be a little more proactive and do that because he has less minutes to worry about, where his energy level is more under control, I think that might be the problem with him, is that he can't handle the minutes that he's being given right now because he's managing his time on the ice. If he's given an opportunity to have lots of energy and have an opportunity to do more in less time, he'll be a better player. And I think that's part of the reason of why a guy like Tanev out of the lineup affects the team. It's basically the minutes that he uses up, other players don't get. They don't get those minutes. They have more time to show how much energy they have, and they can work within a more comfortable TOI that they play better in.
Yeah, no, for sure. And hopefully we'll see a little bit of that tonight. But talking about players that could be on, look to see improvement from, otherwise maybe there is a move to be made. We'll discuss maybe a few players that could be on the trade block, and maybe we'll get a few updates on line rushes here as we continue here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The NHL is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything on who will score next to a third period comeback. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps the game exciting, especially when your team is looking to make a late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com and sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back here to the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti and my friend Frank Stanisci here. You can also check out Frank's work over at Candid Frank live on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. So, Frank, Elliotte Friedman brought up in 32 Thoughts that, it wasn't anything groundbreaking, and we always look and see if Elliott's got some little nuggets that we can use as potential talking points. So I'm going to kind of stretch it a little bit here. These are things that some of the insiders don't like us to do. But essentially, he's saying, obviously, the Leafs have been looking to make improvements to the roster, right? Try to see what can be done. But here's the thing. Brad Treliving, as Elliotte Friedman said, Treliving has looked around. He would like to do roster for roster deals if he can. They do not want to trade futures.
No.
And I think Mike and I have talked about this before, and I'll even reiterate it. In the season like it is now, you're not trading future picks. You've done that far too much. You really don't have many future picks to trade as well. So I think right now it makes sense that Brad Treliving is maybe trying to see, is there a team that's looking to make a move, player for player swap to try to change up their mix as well. I'll let people know that the Leafs have, going forward, a first-round pick in 2028. They've traded the 2026 and 2027. They have a second-round pick available in 2027 and 2028, and they have third-round picks in 2026 and 2028. Because those are the picks that have the most value generally when you're making trades. Leafs don't have many of them to offer up, and at this rate, I think when you're seeing some of the younger players stepping up a little bit here, maybe you're going to hold off on moving some of those. And I think the idea of trying to move players on your roster, we talked about this. Well, right now you're not trading anybody because you're too injured, unless you're getting a complete roster swap, right? A player that can plug right in, right back. But there's just a lot, especially when players start coming back from injuries, you're going to have to make some decisions on who not only sits out, but maybe this is the opportunity where you see if there's any potential option to make some moves. So, Frank, I'm going to ask. We already know. Now, if Elliotte Friedman did say they'll listen to anyone not named Matthews, Nylander, Knies, or Tavares. And frankly, the main reason, too, is Knies has a modified no trade clause because he's not allowed to get a no movement clause just yet with his deal because of his age. Tavares has a no movement clause. Matthews has a no movement clause, and Nylander has no movement clause. So even if the Leafs wanted to make those moves, those players would have to sign off on it, and I don't think they're doing that right now.
What we've learned, here's what we've learned, what we know right now, is that the Leafs have brought in 2 forwards and a defenseman, and I'm talking about Blake, Quillen, and of course Stecher. Yes. What do those 3 guys have in common? What they have in common is they've been doing some hitting. That's how they introduce themselves into the lineup. Their experience coming into the lineup. That happens to be what the players aren't doing that are in the lineup. Now, to your point about trading, absolutely. And the other reason they have no choice, really, in my opinion, they gave away Camp for nothing. They got rid of his salary. That was the only reason.
Yeah, his salary.
They were motivated to get. It was a salary dump. They needed to do it, but they could afford to do the salary dump because they had too many forwards in the lineup. So they can't trade a draft pick for a player they can use, because then they're going to end up giving away another player for nothing, because it'll be the only way they can get rid of a player, at least a player that isn't high value, like a Robertson, for example.
Yeah,
I would put him in the no trade. I would put him in the no trade category, to the point where I'll say this: if they could trade him along with another player in the lineup for a guy that's better than Robertson, a little more physical, plays a little bigger, but can replace the goals that he gets, that trade, you make that all day. All day you make that trade. So in my opinion, whatever trade they do has to come from the roster, David, in my opinion, because there's no room on the roster for adding players. They need to subtract. And I think that in itself, I think of the Leaf lineup right now, I think of it as addition by subtraction. That's what they need to do. When you have too many guys that you can go to, there's that problem where the sticks get a little tighter, the hands grip around, the sawdust starts to develop. There needs to be, they're just on the wrong side of players feeling secure. I know that sounds kind of pampering, but still, they need to feel more secure in their jobs so they don't make mistakes because they're afraid of making mistakes. So yes, from the roster, Robertson, he's at a better place for the Leafs to trade. They'd be trading him when he's a little higher than opposed to lower. One thing the Leafs can't do, and Treliving's too smart to do it, they're not going to trade from weakness.
No, they're not going to trade. You cannot trade from a weakness. You're totally right on that. You're essentially, teams like, why do we want him? Why would we want him? Right. So one thing to talk about here is, first off, Joseph Woll looks like he's getting the start. No surprise.
No surprise.
Like he's playing as long as he can, right? They may give him one game off, right? But he's not going to be scratched. You've got Scott Lyons also taking part in the skate today, so that's a good sign for him as well. I doubt we're going to get, by the time we finish recording, we're going to get an update from Craig Berube on those, but I'll keep an eye on line rushes on those. Just want to keep you guys updated. When I look at players, okay, so who are the players that could potentially get traded or moved? And I think about players who are maybe not pulling their weight in terms of who they are and what they bring. I look at a guy like Calle Jarnkrok right now. I know Mike has been a big defender of Calle Jarnkrok, and he got off to a blazing start to the year. But to me, I get that he brings some defensive value in a team that's not playing well defensively, but at 2.1 million, I need a little bit more than that. Like the injury excuses are out the window now for him. He's healthy. He's playing every game. He's been a healthy scratch too. I just haven't seen it from him. Now, again, that's a trade you're probably not going to win, but what it does is it opens up an opportunity maybe for other players. Whether you're going to get that might have to be also a player for player swap because of salary, right? He has a $2.1 million cap hit. He is a UFA, so maybe a team is willing to take it on. Now, he also has a 10-team no trade list as part of his deal, so that potentially also complicates matters as well. I've seen people talk about Matias Michelli, and would you consider moving him? The guy's an RFA. I like what he brings in terms of his creativity and playmaking ability. You need some of that.
Because he doesn't have that. He has a quality that's rare on this team.
Yeah, and I think especially if he's on the third line. Yes, I know some people like to see him in the top 6, but I think the emergence of Robertson has really made put Michelli down low in the line, which is fine. I mean, again, he is a player that can help others in terms of getting that the playmaking, getting them the puck. And I would like to maybe see him be a little more selfish at time and shoot more. So there's that. We talked about Robertson. Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I would only trade Robertson if now you go from a player that you maybe would have had to give rid of or give away to a player that, there was a reported deal for him and Chinnikov with Columbus. Maybe Columbus feels like that might have been a missed opportunity because I think the Leafs would have lost that trade based on how Robertson is playing right now. Yeah. And I think the Leafs are better off keeping him until a really good offer comes around.
Absolutely.
That gives you a little bit more of what you need in the top 6. Bobby McMahon, some people brought up his name. I think if the Leafs are really out of it, he could be a player that gets you some assets because he is a UFA at the end of the year. You have to think about, are you going to be able to keep all your players? But I like what Bob McMahon brings, his size, the forechecking ability that he has.
When he brings it.
Down the pucks.
When he
brings it. Yeah, I mean, that's it, right? But those are the things you talk about with him. Scott Lund, I don't see a reason you're going to trade
we don't even know what he brings to the team this year, David. We don't even know what he brings to the team this year.
And I think also with him being a center, you don't have the center depth to just move. You're looking at moving a winger, a guy that a player that maybe is not, kind of miscast a little bit or not bringing in enough. Let's look at the blue line for a moment here. I mean, Myers, you put him on waivers. Nobody's real. The only player team might take a chance to grab him on waivers. They might do you a favor, considering the way he's played this year. Brandon Carlo, he's a player that some people wonder, and his name has been talked about before, just because they got him on a reduced salary for the next 2 years. He does have a 10-team no trade this year and an 8-team trade. This year it's an 8-team no trade. Next year it's a 3-team no trade. So you got an ability there to maybe see if a team is looking for a right shot defenseman and maybe has a different offering for you in terms of fit. But I think the Leafs will try to be patient with that one because he does have 2 years left on his deal. Simon Benoit, I mean, your blue line is so injured right now. You don't know about Tanev. This is going to be the same thing with Carlo. You're not going to do anything until you get a better sense of Chris Tanev's timeline and whether he's going to play this year. They don't have much to move on the blue line. Riley has a no movement clause. Jake McCabe has a no trade clause. Ulrich Larson has a 16-team no trade list, and I'm not trading him because he's been playing pretty well for you. He brings you a surplus in value. And in net, you don't have a goal. You're not going to trade a goalie because you got a goalie that's injured right now. And those are assets right now. So the Leafs are, and the last player I wanted to bring up, Max Domi. There are a lot of people that have been wanting to move on from Max Domi. And look, I get it. He's underperformed. He's not bringing the points. but he is also versatile. There's some intangibles that he brings that you wonder if you move off a player like Domi, when guys are getting run around, we saw it with Matthews. Guess who went and challenged Nikita Zadorov? It wasn't one of your bigger players like Dakota Joshua or even Simon Benoit. It was Max Domi.
Yeah.
I like to me, yes. If a team is offered a deal that's hard to pass up, you can't look at it and say, oh no, we can't move Max Domi. He's not that player that has to, like, there's a hard line. I'm not trading him, but I'm not giving away a Max Domi either, because he has been moved around so much in this lineup. Like, a lot of the top 6 guys have had their roles cemented. He hasn't. And I do wonder what impact that plays on a player like Domi, right? Playing on the 4th line. Okay, yes, guys, also because some guys have played better. Oh, interesting news here. With the line rushes coming in, and I just talked about this player, and I just kind of gave him a bad rap. But Cal Yonkrock is apparently going to get promoted to the top line with John Tavares and William Nylander. Frank, what is going on here right now?
Well, you see, now in this episode, playing the role of Mike is Frank. I like Yonkroak. I like him because the possibilities, and that he does pop his head up and be effective, and he does get the odd goal that really matters, and at least he looks like he's working hard, which to me is one of the failings of the team. And I want to, when it comes to the trade business you're talking about, one of the great things about being in the position the Leafs are in, which is near the bottom, is, as we witnessed, Troy Stecher is a Maple Leaf because Maple Leafs had first dibs on him. They are higher up on the scale of who gets the free, the guys that are put out there to be picked up. He is on the Leafs because of the position the Leafs are in. There were other teams who wanted him too, but Leafs had first opportunity. So the Leafs have to take advantage of this. Not that I'm trying to get away from the subject that you've raised, which is trades, but they've got to, as I've said all along, because of the draft picks that aren't available to this Leaf team, they got to figure out a way to get assets that help this team get better. And now they've got an opportunity, being in the position they're in, to grab some assets. And that could help the team down the road, which means players that, you could always take a Stecher and put him together with somebody wanted him in the first place and they couldn't get him because the Leafs got him. I would like to see, you ask about trades. I think if only Riley would be willing to be traded, like Riley along with another player, he needs a fresh start somewhere, and he just isn't working out on this Leaf team. I love his want to. I love his compete. I love how much he cares about being a Maple Leaf. But I just think they've got to move on from him, and they've got to get a new mentality on their blue line. And he stands in the way of that, in my opinion.
I think that only happens if right now he's putting up the points, which, okay, that's good. Defensively, you want to see more from him. I think that only happens if things continue to slide, and you just need something different. You need to do a different mix. And for him too, you get him into a better opportunity where he can finally excel in a different situation. I'm going to now pull up the line rushes from Morning Skate, thanks to Mark Masters for this. So you got Nylander with Tavares and Yonkrock, McMahon with Domi and Robertson. So you're reuniting that trio that played a lot together. Lawrence with Lawton and Cowan. And you got Dakota Joshua with Jacob Quillen and Matthias Michelli. And obviously Matthews and Sammy Blais have been skating as the extras. And nothing changes on the blue line with Myers skating as the extra. So I think what this comes down to, getting that second line sort of together again with McMahon, Domi, and Robertson. Also, because you get to reunite the line in preseason that had one of the better games in Lawrence, Lawton, and Cowan. So, by all accounts, looks like Scott Lawton is going to be good to go and make his return. Callie Yarncroc with Nylander Tavares. It in a sense makes sense because if Yarncrocs able to be that defensive presence, but he's going to have to start winning some puck battles for those guys as well.
His job. That's his job.
He's going to have to do his job to a T. So we'll see how that goes tonight. We'll be back with the Locked On Leafs podcast for you after the Blue Jackets, the game against the Blue Jackets. I do have another guest tonight. So Frank gets the day off. It is our good boy. Actually, no, I'll leave it as a secret. It is someone who hasn't been on the podcast in a little bit here. But he was excited to accept the opportunity to come on the podcast. So we'll have him come on after the game tonight. So we'll break down the Leafs game against the Blue Jackets. We'll set up the weekend game against the Montreal Canadiens, who have not exactly been playing well after their big start to the season. Shocker. I'll discuss that a little bit more on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I want to thank you all for listening and subscribing to the show. Make sure you get the Locked On Leafs podcast wherever you get your podcast from. And make sure you subscribe to Locked On Leafs on YouTube. And also follow us on Instagram. You can find us there on Locked On Leafs. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.
Thank you.